That was, of course, a little tune called The British Grenadiers, an appropriate ditty for talking about today's game. Hello everyone and welcome back to the bunker. This is Captain Dave, and today we will continue with my playthrough of Avalon Hill's 1974 Revolutionary War classic, the Wargame 1776. Before we get started with turn 2, let's review where we ended up after the end of the first turn. In the north, the Americans retreated from the siege of Quebec and joined up with the friendly units in Montreal. This monster stack that's developing has 4 rebel militia, 1 continental army, 1 supply, a magazine, and a bateau unit, a collection of canoes and river boats that allow for rapid movement on the rivers. Next to Montreal is 1 rebel militia holding down the fort at St. John's. Of far more importance to the war, based on the amount of forces involved, is the siege of Boston. Here the British have 19 strength points, while the Americans have been reinforced with 2 militia from Newport, and now have 20 strength points. The British, however, also have artillery and are entrenched in Boston, so as we discussed in our last video, it is unwise for the Americans to attack, and will remain so at least until the artillery, just across the Connecticut River from Springfield, can join in. Also of interest is what's happening in upstate New York. On the left side of the screen you can see Indian tribes, the allies of the British, starting to gather. But maybe more importantly is what's happening on the right side of the screen. You can see a 3/8 unit. This is Tory militia, and they're currently marching on Fort Stanwix, and they hope to be able to take Fort Stanwix in the very next turn. And at the start of the next turn, that's exactly what happens. The 3/8 infantry moves in and attacks. The 1 rebel militia is doubled because it's in a fort, so that's 3 attacking 2, and that's exactly the odds table we use on the combat results table. A 4 is rolled, the defender loses 1 strength point, and therefore the rebel militia is destroyed, and the Tory militia captures Fort Stanwix. So here it is at the end of turn 2. The Americans have added 4 more rebel militia to their stack outside Boston, where the 1/8 rebel militia that's escorting the artillery is still struggling to the snow, trying to get to the siege. So here we come to March 1776, turn 3 in the game. And lo and behold, in the mid-Atlantic Oceans, a British fleet appears, carrying 7 infantry, 2 supply, and an artillery. And this might be an appropriate time to talk about what the overall strategy of both sides is going to be. The British fleet, one thing that really has going for it is flexibility. It can go anywhere on the map. Some places it might take 2 turns to get there, but right now it can go in a wide variety of places. It can make it all the way up to Boston and reinforce the army that's under siege, or it can attack anywhere else on the map in the mid-Atlantic or southern colonies. So what is it the British should do? Well, my inclination is to send them up to Boston, because I think the overall British strategy is to build up strength, and when they have enough strength, move out of Boston and begin conquering New England. And when New England is secured, move into the Middle States. The Middle States are secured, then you can move into the South. And I think that's the path to victory for the British. The Americans have a different strategy, and their strategy is don't lose. Their army exists to damage the British, but very rarely you're going to have the opportunity to destroy them and wipe them off the map. Now we can try something more aggressive, but I think the Americans are now going to get a little bit worried because the thing they've been waiting for is their artillery to catch up to their army, and that could be a very negative thing once the British get more strength points, because if you've got all that army and it's linked up with an artillery, and the British are attacking you and you want to run away, well, you're slowed down by that artillery significantly, and they'll be able to catch you and force combat basically every turn, and you stand a very good chance of losing an American army with that. So it's an interesting strategy as to whether the Americans want to continue the artillery to fight in the siege of Boston, or whether they want to start running away now, because the British are coming. They're only bringing in 7 strength points this turn, But in the very near future, the British are going to get much more significant reinforcements and heavily outnumber the Americans. So we'll see where it goes. But for now, I think the strategy is that the British are going to keep reinforcing Boston, and the Americans are going to not attack Boston, because whether they're reinforced or not, they just don't have the ability to take them on. But there is one more American strategy I want to discuss. I don't want to do it in reality, but I want to talk about it a little bit. During the siege of Boston, there were a number of times George Washington called a council of war with his lead generals. And what he wanted to do, because he always had a very aggressive nature when it came to war, was he wanted to attack the British and to take Boston by force. And every time he did this, his council of war voted against it. They didn't want to do it. They thought it was too dangerous. They thought it would result in the destruction of their army. And I tend to agree. But suppose he had actually done that. Just to see how it would go, let's pretend that on turn 2, Washington got his way and he convinced his council of war to attack. At that point, his army is larger than the British. It's 24 strength points versus the British still stuck at 19 before those reinforcements to get there. So that's still only 1-to-1 odds. But the thinking would be, he's got a lot of militia. If the militia dies, it really doesn't matter that much, because they'll come back at the end of the quarter, which is now just a turn or so away. Hopefully he could withdraw before the main force of his army is destroyed. So we can try that, and we could do a little battle here to see what happens. So here's round 1 of the battle, and tactical cards have to be picked in this case. In this battle, both sides want to fight this battle. Neither side is attempting to withdraw, so they both use the aggressive tactical card matrix here to decide what their tactics are. The British roll an 8-sided die and they get enfilade left, and the Americans roll an 8-sided die and they get enfilade right. They're both basically the same tactic on different parts of the battlefield, so that's no harm, no foul, no advantage to either side when this battle happens. Next we go to the combat results table. The Americans may have an advantage, but it's still only 1-to-1 odds, and that's the table that's used here. And the attacker rolls the die, but in this case, the Americans, again, they don't have artillery, and they're attacking entrenched soldiers. So there is -2 on the die roll. So I rolled the die for the Americans, and they rolled the worst possible result, a 1. Which would be attacker loses 2, except of course there's 2 subtracted from the die roll. So that's 1/2 AE, and that means half the American army is eliminated on the first round of combat. Round 2 of the battle now starts with the Americans at a serious disadvantage. Washington decides he's not going to attack anymore because now he wants to end the battle. But the British have the option of continuing the battle, and they switch over now as the attacker. That does provide some advantages to the Americans. They no longer have to attack the trenches that the British are in, and they don't have to worry about the British artillery, because that only kicks in if there's a battle within trenches. But the British have enough strength, 19-12, to qualify for the 3-to-2 odds table. Using their tactics card, the British roll a 3, which is a frontal assault. The Americans roll and get a refuse the right, and that provides a +1 to the attack. A 3 is rolled, +1 equals 4. Defender loses 1, and that means the Americans are whittled away just a little bit more. So now we move on to round 3 of the battle. And now things have already been really grim for the Americans, but it becomes even worse on round 3, because in the winter you expend your supply unit for only 2 attacks, and after 2 attacks you became unsupplied. And the same doesn't apply to the British, because again they have a magazine in Boston, and that can provide infinite supply. So the Americans are now at half strength after having already been beaten up quite a bit in the battle so far. So the tactical cards are rolled at this point. The British roll another 3, which is another frontal assault, and this time the Americans roll a withdrawal. So that means the British get +3 on their attack die roll. Looking at the combat results table, the odds were 19 British strength points to 11 American, but those 11 American points are halved. so it's at 5.5. That's 3-to-1 odds. So a 6 is rolled on the 3-to-1 odds table. That, a 3 is rolled on the 3-to-1 odds table, but that is modified up to a 6 with the +3 from the tactics, and that is yet another 1/2 of the American army eliminated. And I think you can see where it's going at this point. The American attack has been an absolute disaster. The British haven't taken one loss, and the American army is virtually destroyed. And I think if we went on for another 1, 2, 3 rounds at the most, the American army would cease to exist. This would be a tremendous disaster for the American colonies at this point in the war. Yeah, the Americans can rebuild, but that will take a while, and in that time the British Army is going to be massively reinforced, and they will easily conquer all of New England and probably easily conquer the Middle States before the American Army, which is going to be building in the South and the Middle States, is going to be able to challenge the British again. Now, it's true that the Americans rolled very badly and the British rolled very well during these battles, but I don't think it would have made much difference in the long run, because the best that the first American attack could have been was, of course, if they had rolled a 6. But when you take 2 away from it, that means the attacker loses 1 and the defender loses 1. So both of them lose only 1 step point, and then you go on to the next round of combat. Again, the best they can do is each side loses 1, and then after that they're out of supply. So it's going to end up in disaster for the Americans no matter what. The best thing that can actually happen to them is no effect, which means no casualties and no further combat. But if that's what you wanted to have occur, why did you make the attack in the first place? If the best thing can be no effect, then don't bother making the attack. There's just no point to it. So that battle never really happened. I didn't think it was a good idea. I never would have done it as the American commander. So what does actually happen on turn 3? Well, the British fleet, which is coming up from the south with its 7 strength points, that is going to go to Boston and reinforce the troops there. So what then should the Americans do on their turn? Well, they've got 2 options here. They can continue marching their artillery towards Boston, and this turn finally they get to Dorchester Heights overlooking the city. They could actually begin the attack on the next turn. The problem is all the disadvantages are still there. Their supply unit will last throughout an entire battle because the next turn will be the spring turn, April, that would be 1776. So their supplies will hold out, but the British will now have 2 artillery units to their 1, so the British still have an artillery advantage and they're still entrenched. And at this point, with the British reinforcements, even with the American rebels coming in to help, they're going to be outnumbered by 1 point. So again, it would be nothing but a disaster if the Americans attacked the British. And even worse, starting in the next quarter, the British start getting massive reinforcements coming in. If they're sent to Boston, the Americans are going to be significantly outnumbered, to the point where they probably won't be able to stand up to a united British army. So they're going to want to make plans to retreat, and since the artillery has now joined them, they're going to be moving slower than the British all by themselves. They could easily be tracked down by those superior forces. So the one option is to do a suicidal attack. The other option, it's time to start running away. The British have already gone on turn 3, so the Americans can get a head start by backing up and joining up with their artillery unit, which was making that long trek for no good reason. So there you have it. That's turns 2 and 3, which will end the winter of 1776. We'll pick it up again with turn 4, which starts in April of that year. And as mentioned a couple of times, the British are looking forward to the spring of 1776 because of reinforcements. They just got 7 British regulars, which was nice, but in May they're going to get an additional 20 regulars, which will show up in Quebec. And then in June, another 19 British regulars, which can show up at either Boston, New York, Philadelphia, if controlled, or Halifax. So as I said, that's it. We're going to try and go on to a weekly publication schedule Next time I'll try and do an entire quarter, so 3 turns, April, May, and June, in addition to the interphase, which occurs at the end of every quarter. So that's it, and we'll see you hopefully next week.